My name is Christopher Carlozzi. I'm the State Director for the National Federation of Independent Business, NFIB. We represent small businesses from all across the state, all types of industry, retail, wholesale, manufacturing, even agriculture, service. We have business owners really in every type of business, mainly smaller businesses, 10 or fewer employees, but we really have members all over the place in every corner of the Commonwealth. We also have when you're an NFIB member, you're not just an NFIB member in the state that you're in, because we are in every state. Also, we have federal representation as well. So we lobby and advocate on small business issues. Usually people ask me to speak after breakfast because you might not have an appetite after what I have to say. I'm going to be going through, you're laughing now, I'm going to be going through some legislation that impacts small businesses, things that are sort of in play right now, things that are still moving through the legislature, things that have not been killed for the year, things that have been carried over, and really in play till the end of session. So I think I'm going to start with tax issues. And if you remember, we passed a somewhat robust tax package, about $1 billion tax package for small businesses in it. One of the things we cared about from NFIB's standpoint was a change in the estate tax. We were worst in the nation, ranked worst in the nation on estate tax. We moved from the $1 million exemption to $2 million. So we are no longer worst, we are now third worst in the nation. What I will say is that we are trying to move to a more competitive state in Massachusetts. We're trying to be more competitive on tax issues. Unfortunately, we moved in the wrong direction this year. The tax foundation that ranks all the states based on competitiveness had us in the middle of the pack before in 2023. We were at number 34. We plummeted to number 46th in the nation because of the change from having a flat tax to now a graduated income tax when the income tax surcharge passed. But like I said, we're trying to become more competitive. We were very excited when the governor said there are no tax increases in the budget or any of the plans going forward that she put forward. Unfortunately, the next day, and any local official in the room, you might want to cover your ears on this one, there was a plan to have a local option tax plan. It's called the Municipal Empowerment Act. And I'll throw some Senate bills out there or bill numbers out there, because one of the things I see up there, advocacy, you want to communicate with your lawmakers on these things. I'm not just coming up here to scare you on some of the bills. I want you as business owners to be able to communicate with your legislators on the things that impact your business. So there is a plan, Senate Bill number 2571, more specifically Section 68, 72, 73, and 74, that impact a lot of businesses in this room. It increases the local option meals tax from 0.75% to 1%. It increases the local option occupancy tax on hotels, motels, 6% to 7%, even higher in Boston from 6.5 to 7.5%, and then creates a new annual 5% tax on a vehicle's value. Those are all things that impact small businesses. As any restaurant owner in the room can tell you, between labor costs, the cost of food and products, meal prices are already up. So the state and municipalities are getting more money for each meal that is being sold because proportionally the percentage is going up on the tax. To increase it even more might discourage diners from going out eating. The bill will be even higher. And the same on local option occupancy taxes. We want people coming into the state spending tourism dollars. This might have a chilling effect on that. And then the last one, if you're any small business, you have fleets of vehicles in some cases. Your workers require vehicles to come into the workplace. Many of small businesses that we represent, you can't work from home. You have to be there either to be at a register, a server at a table, or working at a manufacturer. So that's not just a tax on small businesses, but their employees as well. And you're already paying excise tax, $25 per $1,000 on vehicles. This would be in addition to that. So that's something we're watching. I went to the hearing to testify against this bill, and for those saying it is a local option, I'll just put these numbers out there. 251 communities levy the current local option meals tax. 217 already levy the local option occupancy tax. A lot of the local officials at that hearing were already kind of champing at the bit to do it because they said they needed revenue. Well, guess what? Small businesses need revenue too. They've been struggling for this time. And even some lawmakers pushed back when they said, well, we had ARPA programs and that money kind of dried up. And some of the legislators in the room said, well, that's why we asked you to kind of do one-time programs, not ones that went on in perpetuity, where you would require additional funds. So that's one bill we're watching. Another one that kind of ties into this is on what's called regional ballot initiatives. That's House Bill 2737. And what it will do is, we talked about some construction projects that are going on. Well, what this one would do is, if you have a couple communities that might want to band together on, say, a road project or a bridge repair, they could band together, put a ballot question in front of the voters in those communities, and in it, it would increase certain taxes: payroll taxes, sales taxes, property taxes, or vehicle excise tax. There we go again on vehicle excise tax. If the community votes on it, that would increase taxes in those communities. To us, that's not just a bad idea because it's a tax increase. It creates a patchwork of taxes. Imagine having a sales tax that differs in one community to the next. So that's something we've opposed. It has gained traction in the past. I think it's passed in the Senate before in different vehicles. You know, it's hard enough putting out and stopping statewide ballot initiatives. Imagine putting out 351 brush fires across the state when each of these issues pop up. So that's kind of it on taxation that I wanted to talk about. The other thing is cost of doing business. There are minimum wage proposals out there. Bills, and House Bill number 1925 and Senate Bill number 1200 still in play, that will increase the minimum wage in the state. We commissioned a study with the Regional Economic Model, Inc., REMI, it's a reputable researcher, to kind of look at these bills and see the impact of them. And what the bills do, they will raise the state minimum wage in 2025 to $16.25 an hour, $17.50 the year after that in 2026. In 2027, it will go to $18.75 and then $20 an hour in 2028. And then it's indexed to inflation and will keep going up from there. So we kind of looked at those numbers and found that in our model, the impact of those bills would mean, the study found that over the next decade, so after that indexing went in place, 23,000 jobs would be lost, representing more than 0.5% of the state's employment base. In that number, 14,000 of them, or 57%, were in small businesses with fewer than 20 workers. You look at the cumulative real economic output loss. By 2033, it would exceed $3.4 billion, and nearly $1.8 billion of that lost economic output would be by small businesses, so that same number. There's a proposal, you've probably all seen it. It started out as a legislative proposal. It may now end up as a ballot proposal on the tipped wage. I'm sure we have some restaurant owners in the room. This proposal would phase out the tipped wage. Right now, as you probably know, servers are paid a portion of the minimum wage. If they don't make in tips at the end of a shift, that full $15 an hour right now, the restaurant owner has to put in the differential. Massachusetts actually a little more unique. Back in 2018, when we passed the grand bargain, you had most states require it for a pay period. We have it by shift where you have to have that differential. So we're a little more strict than most states. But this proposal that's out there, it would raise the tipped wage to 64% of the state minimum wage by 2025, 73% by 2026, 82% by 2027, 91% by 28, and then it would be completely phased out by 2029. It would be a full minimum wage. It also calls for tip pooling. Other states have tried this. The state of Maine, also through a referendum, did it. What happened? Well, the servers ended up making less money at the end of the day. They ended up flooding the State House at a hearing for a bill to reverse it. The bill ended up passing, and they had to go back and reverse what was done on the phase out of the tipped wage, and then kind of the servers were happy again. So that's one to keep an eye on. It's probably going to take a ballot approach. I know our friends at the Restaurant Association have filed a lawsuit on it, so it's one to follow if you're a business owner. How many in this room are struggling to hire? I've heard the conversation earlier. I'm sure everybody in this room is either struggling with bringing people in or keeping people in the workplace. There are time off bills floating through the legislature at every juncture. Every day I see a new time off bill. I'm going to throw one out there right now, 4217, House Bill 4217, and that mandates time off to vote, mandatory paid time off to vote at the beginning or end of a shift. We all want civic participation, right? I'm sure everybody does. But right now in Massachusetts, you have early voting. You have a pretty lax absentee voting process. But what this bill would do is mandate that employers at the beginning or end of a shift has to give the worker time off to vote, and paid time. There's no proof on the worker's part to prove that they actually went voting. They don't have to come with a little "I voted" sticker and come into the business and say, yeah, I voted. If you as an employer fail to pay this, you have to give that worker a full day's pay as a penalty. So that's one to watch. That snuck through the House in what's called an informal session where they actually don't have to vote on it. Kind of snuck through and just passed. Nobody really raised an alarm on it. No one questioned it. So it has moved over. The Senate has not voted on it yet. But that is one to watch. We talk about all these time off policies and keeping people in the business. Well, I mean, I don't know about you, but I would really watch it. All they have to do is give you 3 days notice, and that's it. So the other one is we all have paid family medical leave in Massachusetts. We have a paid sick leave policy in Massachusetts. There are two bills that are a little difficult to talk about, but they do fundamentally change both the paid family medical leave and sick leave policy if passed. And no one's questioning the intent of the bill. I think the intent is certainly something we could all agree with, and that's on pregnancy loss leave. As I said, difficult one to talk about. But it is not so much the subject matter of what, I'm sure no one in this room would say if paid family medical leave, if the existing programs were going to cover that, no one would have a problem with it. But what it actually does, it changes the paid family medical leave, which, as you know, pays out through a system that employees and employers pay into, and then the leave's paid out through that. What this bill would do, Senate 1201, is require 10 days of leave, but it's paid by the employer. It just adds on to the paid family medical leave section of law. I don't know if that was a drafting error or what, but it's one that we're watching and concerned about. And the House version does something similar, where it fundamentally changes the paid sick leave law. As you know, employers under 11 don't have to offer paid time. Employers over 11 workers do, and you accumulate hours over a period of time. Every hour worked is every hour you have leave is for every 30 hours worked. But this bill would change it so that it immediately, you start a job, you have 24 hours of leave. It accumulates at a different rate, and essentially at the end of the day, turns out to be 64 hours of sick time rather than the 40. So once again, no one's questioning the intent of the bill. It's just the way that the bills are put together would fundamentally change both sick leave and paid family medical leave. And there's also bills on bereavement leave out there to mandate that employees have to have bereavement leave as part of these programs. As you're all struggling to staff your businesses, those are things to watch as they move forward. Operating costs, that's another thing. We are an expensive state to do business in Massachusetts. There are bills that would require all commercial buildings, not just residential or hotels or where people may be staying, to have carbon monoxide detectors, and multiple in larger facilities. So watch that one. There are bills on changing stations, Senate 1984, where if you have a restroom in the business, no matter the gender of the restroom, you would have to install a changing station in it in a mandatory way. Some particularly small bathrooms would have to do it. There was another bill on top of that that required a changing station that could take up to 350 pounds and have a special, kind of walled off section. That bill we recommended, how about you try it for state buildings first, and if it works there, take it somewhere else. And they actually did change the wording of the bill to say, we'll try it in state buildings first, and we'll see how it works out. So that's one to watch as well. I'm going to tell you two very expensive letters right now. UI. You all have seen UI costs go up. You all had layoffs, I'm sure, or maybe some of you didn't during COVID. But the end result of that was Massachusetts had one of the highest unemployment rates in the nation. Our UI fund went insolvent. We had to borrow from the federal government, and now you, as employers, are paying back $2.7 billion in money that was bonded for layoffs that were essentially not your fault. Just a little history on that. The $2.7 billion is being paid off in what's called a COVID assessment in your UI bills. We are currently at rate schedule C, which has gone up from rate schedule A, so that was a tax increase this year in 2024 in your UI taxes. But I don't mean to scare you again, but there's a $2.5 billion unknown liability out there on UI. The state, during the COVID years, they were billing UI claims to the federal COVID, the PUA fund, not the state fund, and then they found out through an audit later that was $2.5 billion that was being charged to the wrong thing. So we don't know if on top of that $2.7 billion you might have to pay back more. I know the Healy administration is in talks with the federal government to try to prevent that, which is good. But right now, I think in the year's time or so since this was uncovered, there's still been ongoing negotiations. We already have one of the most generous benefits in the nation on UI, the most generous benefits, and some of the most lax eligibility requirements. We have consistently been ranked 50th worst in the nation for UI taxes year after year in Massachusetts. And when I look at the numbers year over year, we're paying out more in benefits now with a very low unemployment rate in 2024, February 2024, than we did in February 2023 when we had a higher unemployment rate. So for some reason, we are paying out higher benefits. I've been told that that's due to a higher average weekly wage, and that's part of why. But if we're looking at where it's going over the next couple years at the outlays, they're expecting we're going to be paying out $2.7 billion by 2028 in UI costs. And that Schedule C that you're at will be up to Schedule F if it continues down the current path. And there are bills to make it worse, unfortunately. There's Senate Bill number 1172, which allows striking workers to collect UI benefits. And it's somewhat punitive, too. So if you, as an employer, hire temp workers or replacement workers, it goes into effect immediately rather than a waiting period. And once again, that's not the purpose of UI. That was meant for loss of job at no fault of the worker. So we've been fighting back on that to prevent striking workers from collecting UI. There are also bills that would add further confusion to the independent contractor situation, allowing them to collect and employers having to pay in for independent contractors. That's Senate Bill 1190. And there's also ones to expand eligibility and benefits, Senate Bill number 1175 and 1183. We don't need to make the Mass Unemployment Fund any worse. I sit on the DUA commission, so every month I'm a commissioner for DUA, and I get to kind of see what happens with the UI fund. There's a reason we're 50th in the nation on this. It's something that needs to be fixed. So just briefly to talk about a couple of the bills on that are, I would consider, energy, environment. There are bills that would essentially ban virtually any type of styrofoam container, plastic utensils, and really limit some of these small restaurants' ability to use these things. That's Senate Bill 570. That's still in play and progressing this year. It's one of those bills that we've been continuing to watch. I know a lot of communities have bag bans. This would also impact bag bans and allow fees to be charged on that. So one other thing to keep an eye on, there are bills that are moving further and further towards electrification and full electrification in Massachusetts. We want a cleaner state, no argument there from me, but it's the approach that we're moving, and we might be moving too quickly that we kind of get ahead of our skis on this electrification issue, where we're banning in some buildings fossil fuel use. Some communities are already doing it now. But statewide, there's been bills proposed on this topic, and if you're a restaurant, you use natural gas. I mean, it would stop you from doing that. And I'm kind of a policy nerd, as you can tell, but I also look at the ISO grid all the time on really hot, really cold days, kind of see where we're getting our fuel from. And if you look, the vast majority of it on those really hot, really cold days is from natural gas. And when we don't have enough, and when we're at capacity to prevent rolling brownouts, blackouts, we start burning barrels of oil. So if we want a cleaner Massachusetts, we shouldn't really be cutting off some of these energy sources, or else we end up doing things like having to burn barrels of oil, which we don't want to do. Just look at the breakdown and see where it's coming from on those days. There's also been a push, and this has already been done and kind of in the regulatory process, that will ban the use of or the sale of internal combustion engine vehicles in Massachusetts by 2035. They haven't banned registrations yet, but there have been bills to do so. But right now, if you're a car dealer, you cannot sell an internal combustion engine car in Massachusetts after 2035. So that was one that is still, like I said, in the regulatory phase. And then lastly, I will talk about Senate Bill 1170, which is the workplace bullying bill. No one is for bullying in the workplace. No one wants to see anyone bullied in the workplace, right? But this bill, you can drive a truck through the language. It pretty much opens an employer up to any sort of lawsuit based on whether it's a corrective act and you're talking to an employee. If they see it the wrong way and they feel like they're being bullied by the employer, they could sue you under this. And the damages in the bill include back pay, front pay, emotional distress, punitive damages, and attorney's fees. It also extends to disputes between employees. So if you have employees, maybe two guys are duking it out in the parking lot in the other corner, and you don't see it and you don't know about it, you'd still be held liable. If two employees are maybe having a little argument on social media, you as the employer still could be held accountable. If you're any attorney worth your salt, you could probably make a case under this and sue an employer. So it's one we watch for. It's one we've fought back several times now. I think it's actually advanced in some stages too. Over some years, it's been filed year after year. But it is one we watch. So I know I went over a little. I know I had a little extra time. You never want to tell someone who does policy discussions at the State House and goes up and advocates on bills they have extra time, because we will use it. But you know, if there are any questions, happy to take them. I don't know if we have time for questions, but if there are any questions on bills, anybody? Anyone want to throw anything out there? But as you can see from, you know, some of the things we've covered, there's a lot going on. And as that advocacy says, communicate with your chamber head. Deanne's an excellent resource. But reach out to your legislators. I know you have representation from your legislator's office in the room right now, state and federal. Talk to them. Let them know. You are the experts. You are the people who run the business. You know the impact of these policies. You know the real world impact on both you and your workers. Sometimes they don't know at the State House. They just need someone to reach out and tell them, this is what happens in the real world when you do these things. Sometimes all these time off policies, well, they lead to more restrictive. You might have had very robust and generous, you know, time off plans. Now you've kind of got to fine tune them and cater them to what the state is telling you to do. We also find, we talked about minimum wages and increasing pay. We do surveys all the time to our members. We found that about 40% of them are trying to hire still. It's kind of ticked down over time. But we've also found that when you look at wages and pay, most of our members have increased compensation in the labor shortages, and during these times when you're trying to get people into the workforce, they've all increased compensation. So now you're talking about increasing it on top of that, and you know, it leads to a compression effect. You have to raise wages all through the pay scale, and at the end of the day, employers have to make tough decisions.